I thought we could start with sort of the concerns and the threats, and we'll work our way towards some of the possibilities. So, Senator Heinrich, you, of course, founded the Senate Artificial Intelligence Caucus in 2019, amongst other initiatives. Can you start with that?
Yeah, I think the biggest threat is if we allow artificial intelligence to become a tool that supplants artists rather than a tool that is used by creative artists.
Mr. Martin.
Yeah, I think that's certainly one of the concerns is if AI is drawing pictures and writing books, and those things are issued by the big corporations, and they don't need to employ writers or artists or actors anymore. That's a danger here. There's also, I'm one of the signatories to the Authors Guild lawsuit.
I have a question just about that.
And their concern is focused on the other end of it, which is we're not being compensated for the books. All of these things are being fed by, they put in all of my, like, everything I ever wrote since 1971 has probably been fed into chat at this point, and into the other things, and everything that Stephen King ever wrote, and everything that Shakespeare ever wrote. And this is the raw material that feeds them, and there's no compensation for it. So that's the focus of the big class action suit.
Dr. Moses.
So I would agree with that as really the big problem, and I think it's particularly interesting that creatives are the jobs that are maybe most obviously threatened right now. I sort of think of them as the tip of the spear. That jobs like artists and writers, these are not jobs where we would say, oh, well, maybe the AI will replace you, just like maybe the AI will replace a factory worker, and so we'll just retrain you to do another job. I think the real threat is that not only are people immediately, have their livelihoods threatened, but that we as humanity are threatened with losing the creative contributions of humanity, and I think that's a very scary position to be in, and I hope we have started. I think efforts going on right now, lawsuits, union work, those are all efforts that are making some initial inroads in what is probably going to be a very long fight.
If I could come back to that lawsuit real quick, Mr. Martin, it's a very poetically written lawsuit, which makes sense since it's from the Writers Guild. But it talks about how the algorithms are at the heart of OpenAI's enterprise, and at the heart of these algorithms is systematic theft on a mass scale. And part of the suit's argument is that the language models spit out derivative work. I'm just curious if you can articulate why that's different than, for example, the 3 million fan fiction sites on your work.
Well, and this is a huge can of worms here, but I am not a supporter of fan fiction, never have been. I know some writers don't mind it. I've long ago decided it's copyright infringement, and I'd rather they didn't do that. Now, I have to clarify this, because otherwise someone on the internet is going to come back and you wrote fan fiction when you were a kid. Yes, when I was in high school and junior high school, I wrote stories for fanzines. And we called that fan fiction. It was fiction written by fans, published in fanzines for which you received no payment, just glory. But all the characters and the stories were original. I created my own characters, Manta Ray and the White Raider. I was a superhero fan. I didn't write about Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and Batman. That would have been, those belong to DC. Those belong to Marvel, other people. They only had to write those stories about them. And that was a lesson that some of my fellow fans learned pretty quickly when they tried to do a Spider-Man fanzine and Marvel came down on them, pretty hard. That was a different type of fan fiction. Now fan fiction has defined itself as people feel they have the right to write Tolkien fan fiction, or fan fiction about my characters, or fan fiction about, Stephen King, Robert Jordan, Salman Rushdie, you name it, and all this is raw material, and they say they love it, so therefore they have the right to write about it. I don't think they do, but it's better left ignored, I think, than anything. But I don't know if we can ignore it when AI start doing it, and they're not doing it, they're not publishing a mimeograph fanzine that 20 people will see. These things potentially will go out to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people on major streamers and movies and all of that stuff. What we have to arrive at is, and I don't think you can halt technology. The Luddites tried, and it didn't work out too well for the Luddites. I remember the Catholic Church once banned the crossbow because it was a hideous weapon that would, and that didn't work out too well either. You can't turn back technology, but we can control technology. I mean, AI has to be relegated to being a tool that writers and artists can use, and not a replacement for writers and artists.
So Senator Heinrich, sorry, you've introduced the Creative IA Act, but is the Copyright Act sufficient to address these issues?
I don't think that copyright well, we should take a step back and just recognize that the United States has an almost 250-year history of figuring out how to value intellectual property. And it is one of the most unique sets of law, and it sets us apart as a nation in the world, and I think we should all really value that. I think we're gonna have to update that law, but there is really good fundamentals there. That's why you see some of these legal actions moving forward. But there are many things that we could not have imagined when much of this law was put in place. There was a piece of legislation, discussion draft that's being circulated right now that deals with sort of right of publicity. And I think we need to articulate for the future specifically how AI is going to fit into this history of intellectual property.
What about on the reverse end of it? The Copyright Office, I think, just rejected for the second time an application from someone who their art won, I think, the Colorado State Fair art competition, high stakes, and they rejected and said you have to be a person to copyright. Do you think that also needs to be looked at or not?
No, I think I think they got it largely right, because what copyright was created for was to actually protect human creators and their work. And so you really, I mean, I think the courts will continue to look at like how much input did an artist put into a particular outcome. Was it just a prompt in a large language model or even a visual model, or were there many, many iterations where they're investing work and time in the things that we all know artists do? So I think so far the courts have largely gotten that right.
So Dr. Moses, can you ground us scientifically in terms of where the technology is? I told you before we started that I'd been reading Dr. Melanie Mitchell's book about artificial intelligence, where she feels like we are so far away, if we're ever going to get there, to having AI that actually can be that isn't distinguishable from human creation.
So Professor Mitchell wrote that book, what was that, 5 years ago, which is a lifetime ago in terms of AI. There have been tremendous changes since that time. Really, ChatGPT being released now was November of last year, so less than 11 months ago. And I think where we are, I'll say a little bit about where we are and how fast we're going. AI, like most of computation, is on an exponential growth curve, which means it looks very small for a very long time and suddenly it explodes, right? It's if its power is doubling every couple of months, it looks like not much because it started off so small, and then it's making increasingly larger gains over time. Just as the power of the computing that you hold in your pocket is just astronomical compared to the largest computers from several decades ago. So a big question is AI actually on that same trajectory? Or did we have a big burst and it's really going to hit a wall? We have these periods of AI winters where things, we think we see on the horizon great developments in AI and they don't quite pan out. And I will say that I think nobody knows right now whether this is just we're on this exponential growth curve and it's going to keep going, or if we are going to hit some limits. One of the interesting things that is happening now in generative AI is this ability to mimic human speech is really, it's one, catalyzed this huge market, right, of new tools which people are using to build upon the language models so that they become more useful, so more people can get involved with them, which provides more opportunity for training these models. So lots of reasons to think we might actually be on this kind of exponential growth. I could just say a few words about how this technology actually works. People may have heard that what is underlying this technology are neural networks, right? These networks of connections where a machine is essentially taking a bunch of numbers that govern how the network works, and it's like monkeys on a typewriter, right? You try numbers, you try to predict something. If you predict correctly, you say that was a good set of numbers. If you predict incorrectly, you throw those numbers out. And what the magic sort of trick was with this is a few little interesting tweaks to technology that's really existed for the last few decades. And then realizing that what you could predict is text that already exists. And so the AI could train itself. It could read a poem, roses are red, violets are, and it would predict the next word, just like you all did, right? If it came up with blue, it would say, oh, I have a good neural network for this text. And if it came up with peacock, it would say, well, this is wrong. If it came up with orange, it would say, it's a little closer. And so that trick allows these models to train themselves. And they've trained themselves on no one knows exactly what, but a large fraction of the material available on the internet. And so one question is, well, what happens when you've used all of the material available on the internet, right? It's been using more and more and more over time. It's actually sort of getting close to including, a substantial fraction, and then what do you do after that? I think that introduces all kinds of privacy concerns, right? Where's the next set of data going to come from? But I think that these changes really have changed the landscape from when Melanie Mitchell wrote the book, that almost every computer scientist would have said we were many years away from the sorts of capabilities that we see in this generative AI in not just creative writing. It's incredibly good at writing small programs. I use it all the time to write little programs to do little pieces of work for me. And so I think that we're in a time of tremendous uncertainty where it's really not clear where this technology is going, which is a really good reason to get ahead of it and make some rules and guidelines that help guide where we go next.
And from a policy point of view, we have a window right now, a window that we lost with social media when it came on the scene, right? Like we did not, government did not get ahead of social media, and now it's really hard to do anything about that. So right now, for the most part, a lot of the policy proposals that you're seeing around artificial intelligence are bipartisan, and they have not, people have not retreated to their partisan corners because the so-called think tanks in Washington said to one side they need to be over here and the other side they need to be over there. And so, now is the moment. We need to move quickly. As dysfunctional as parts of Congress are at the moment, we need to try to start building that consensus and figure out how to write policy before it becomes hopelessly partisan.
Well, to follow that question, New York Magazine profiled Sam Altman, the CEO, you know who he is, last month. And in that story, there was an engineer who was quoted, I'm going to get her name wrong, Heidi Klum, and she argued that AI doesn't need special regulation, that it should be regulated the way any other technology is within its own special use. So if there's an issue with AI and writers, it should be dealt with copyright. Does that seem correct?
I think she's making a good point in the sense that applications are really going to matter here. So if you have something that doesn't have a big impact on the world, it may not need regulation. But if you're going to take an artificial intelligence model and you're going to put it in charge of something physical, like a car, like a power grid, things that are going to impact whether people live or die, then we need to be able to test and certify those things. And certainly, if there's going to be artificial intelligence in charge of whether you get a mortgage or not, you're going to want to know that bias wasn't baked into that model, and you're going to lose out on economic opportunity because of the nature of the data or the nature of the model. So I think her point that these things do fit in certain buckets. There are going to be some of these things that come out of the Judiciary Committee and others that are going to come out of the Armed Services Committee. But I think what we can all agree, and I will say we had a whole host of experts, as well as artists, as well as union leaders, as well as civil society experts, all in a room a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C. And the first question asked was, does government need to regulate this? And everyone said yes.
I'm coming back to Mr. Martin in a second, but first, Dr. Moses, I mean, algorithms are a big part of your work as related to criminal justice. I was asking you before this started, is there an equivalent in the creative arts? My interactions with algorithms is Netflix wanting me to constantly watch movies where people fall in love at Christmas, and I'm like, I don't care about that. But that's not really hurting anybody except my own aesthetics. So.
I apologize on behalf of the algorithms. So I think that, yes, I think there is a parallel that was just actually published in the last week or 10 days. There was an article in The Lancet, a medical journal, about a group of public health workers asked AI to generate images of African doctors treating white patients. And this was intentional to try to rebalance sort of an image of white saviors. Almost all of the public health international images would have white doctors and black and brown patients. And so they asked the AI to generate images that could sort of counter that narrative. And what was fascinating is that the AI could not or would not do it. They asked it 300 times. It generated 300 images, and it would generate images with white doctors and black children most of the time, even though it specifically asked to do the opposite. Then it would generate images of black doctors and black children, or white doctors and white children. They generated one very bizarre image of one African doctor treating one white patient with weird African sort of inspired garb on. So that's an example of bias that's just baked into these algorithms at a depth that's really surprising, even to me. Even though I've spent a lot of time looking at bias in algorithms, I was amazed. I tried to replicate that this morning with DALL-E. This was with Midjourney, and I too could not get the AI to generate the image that was asked for. I could get black doctors treating white rabbits. I could get black doctors treating all kinds of other objects, but never white patients. It would refuse to generate those images. So that's an example of the kind of depth of the bias that's baked into these algorithms. So when we ask them to do things that have real impact on people's lives, yeah, that's the kind of bias that we want
And
to
you can
protect
end up
against.
automating bias, so doing bias very efficiently.
That's very strange. I mean, I think there's what is AI? I mean, what is the definition of it? That's an interesting question here. I noticed when you gave me this microphone here, and I tested it, and then I turned it off, and it's got a little window here, and it said, bye. When I turned it off, is that because the microphone is really concerned and was trained to be polite or something? I know some human being decided it would be nice if in the little window when you turn it off it said bye. So I'm a science fiction writer and a fantasy writer. I've been at stuff for years, and since all the way I was a kid, following stories about robots and all that. And then when computers came in, I was never a computer guy, but I followed a little. And one of the big rules was garbage in, garbage out. And that's what we got to think of. These machines, this microphone up to the giant machine that biggest computer in the world, the most sophisticated, or whatever is going to be around in 10 years. I don't know they really have intelligence, but what they certainly don't have yet, and I don't know, this is the big wall, they don't have volition. I mean, your chat didn't decide on itself, let's put some, you told it to do that, and it was unable to do. And other people are telling them to write George R.R. Martin's last book, here, I'll feed you the first 8, and you finish it. The computer doesn't want to do that, the system doesn't want to do that. And that, of course, is always the fear. I mean, you even see people like Stephen Hawking talking about the dangers of AI to not just the writers and artists, but to all life on the planet, to humanity. But he's projecting the kind of stuff that Isaac Asimov wrestled with, the kind of stuff that Carl Peck wrestled with, that not only would these machines have the ability to do what we tell them, but at some point, in addition to being fast calculators, they will develop volition. They will decide to do things that nobody told them to do, that they think they do, and that's scary and a global thing, but that's probably a lot bigger than Congress can pass a law for right now.
No, but it is a question that I've asked a lot of the figures in this space. It's like, when do you need to be able to pull the cord out of the wall? And it's the moment that intentionality seems to manifest itself.
Well, one of the issues that ChatGPT was concerned about when I brought it up with it this morning was transparency. And Mr. Martin said the WGA, the strike among the writers, which you were very supportive of, I think 99% of the members voted in favor of the agreement, and AI ends up being a big issue in that strike. And one of the things they agreed to had to do with transparency. Can you speak to whether, are you satisfied with that agreement? And I'm curious, is this sort of what also needs to happen, is that labor needs to be fully involved in having similar types of agreements across different
Well,
parts?
transparency is certainly good. There's a lot of issues here that are very complex, and I don't know that I or the Writers Guild, that was the Writers Guild of America, the Hollywood union I belong to. The big suit is being brought by the Authors Guild, which is book writers, and they're concerned about all the books being used as raw material, which is a separate but related issue. There are so many things that these AI systems can do. These computers can do. I was in Atlanta a few months ago, meeting with some people. We're doing a film adaptation of an old screenplay that I wrote 20 years ago, science fiction screenplay. And I was meeting with a big computer effects company or something like that. And they were showing me the new volume kind of thing and photographing and scanning. There's Chris Eyre. Chris, stand up there. He was with me. Chris volunteered to go in and be scanned. So he did this, and he was scanned completely. Now, they have his image. They can put him in a toga for the next Roman movie. They can dress him like a Nazi, although why an Indian would be a Nazi in World War II, I don't know, but they can put him in that. They can give him a sex scene and put him in naked. They have his scan, a 360-degree scan, and I've seen him change these costumes in an instant. It's amazing. It's magic. I'm pretty impressed. But who owns his image? Who owns his image? Some of the things that actors were dealing with was the studios were saying, or part of the studios, you come in, we'll scan you, and we'll pay you $200. That's your daily rate. And then we own your image forever. We want a crowd scene, we'll put you in it. We want anything we want, we'll put you in it. We own you. We paid you $200, now we own your image. You can't have that. It wipes out a whole generation of extras and actors and all that. And it's not even, you can go not just for the extras, but for the stars. What if the next time I do a movie, I want Humphrey Bogart to play in it? We can just have someone moving through it, and then the computer will give him Humphrey Bogart's face and voice, and we can have Marilyn Monroe in the movie, Jean Harlow, Marlene Dietrich, whatever. Except if we want the capacities of machines is fascinating, and there's part of me that's like a geek that wants to play with them. Oh boy, I could have Marilyn Monroe and Sophia Loren. They're two heads on a giant mutant body. Wouldn't that be cool? Marilyn and Sophia arguing as they went around killing people. I'm a strange, sick person. But the point is, Chris is going to direct that now. A lot of it comes down to, property rights and copyright and things like that. We can do these things. I don't think we're going to be able to pass laws that say you can't do these things. But the question is, who owns it, and who then has the right to do it, and who gets paid for it, and how long do they get paid for it?
Because the Author Guild suit seems to feel that it's fine if it's public domain.
No, it's not.
That's what the lawsuit says. They could have used works in the public domain, but do
Sure,
not.
yes, well, we can do anything with words in the public domain. That's a function of the way the copyright laws were written. If you know the history of American copyright, which I'm sure the senator does, you know, when I started my career in the 70s, you know, you published a story, you had 17 years, I believe it was, and then you had to file a renewal. If you went to sleep and you forgot to file your renewal, you lost the copyright. If you did file a renewal, you got additional 17 years, and then it expired, then it went into public domain. But they changed that to life of the author plus 75 years. And one of the reasons they changed a lot of these copyright laws was because Disney kept lobbying, because they didn't want to lose Mickey Mouse. And they kept extending, you know, because Disney had a lot of money and a lot of clout, they kept extending the copyright longer and longer, until, of course, politics sneaks in everywhere. Disney took on Florida about that "don't say gay" law, and that idiot DeSantis attacked them, and then all the Republicans turned against Disney, so they weren't going to protect Mickey anymore. So Mickey is now public domain, but only Steamboat Willie Mickey, not later Mickey.
But
Senator.
I do think this is, you know, copyright law and intellectual property law were written for the tools at the time. And so you have things like lyrics and you know, royalties for songs and all of that, but no one thought at the time like that you needed to protect your own voice. But now you can have your voice harvested off the internet and retooled to do new songs, as we saw with Drake and The Weeknd. And so what we're really talking about is just respecting the individual artist and saying you're in control of your image and your voice and your art, and applying the same values that we've had for a very long time in this country to a new set of tools.
And you imagine that that could be regulated by the government, how that was treated?
I do, because you see these very interesting coalitions that are not partisan. So, you know, you look at a place like Nashville, Tennessee, and the enormous creative arts base there. So you have the Tennessee delegation interested in this, as well as the California delegation. And so it is not, I do think there's a window here where we can not only say what we've done in the past applies here, but just make that very, very clear in law.
Dr. Moses?
Yeah, I'll add, you asked about, you know, and we were talking about these artificial general intelligence concern that the AI is going to develop its own volition and do terrible things and destroy humanity, you know, decide we're a plague upon this earth and to get rid of us. Maybe we fear that there's a little introspection involved in that fear. I think that it's very unclear whether that's a real concern, right? Whether we're on a path to something like that. But I think that for those who are concerned that that's the path we're on, the right response to take is to deal with the more immediate problems that are right in front of us, right? We don't want to wait until the moment where, you know, Hal decides not to open the doors for that to be the moment to realize, oh, we need to pull the plug, right? We need to actually develop the right sorts of regulatory responses to an evolving technology, and we don't want to put this off for 5 or 10 years till we've decided, oh, this problem is really, you know, existential. So I think that sort of dealing with these issues that sometimes sound mundane about property rights and copyrights, issues about discrimination, these are the kinds of things that are being put in front of us right now, and changing the regulatory structure to adapt to these is what's going to give us the ability to adapt, you know, more and more in the future as the threats sort of change from this technology.
And is AI capable of telling us whether or not something was created by AI versus a person?
So this is something we deal with a lot in the University of New Mexico and in education, in K through 12, in university education, right? When was the essay written by a bot and when was it written by a student? In computer science, we ask when was a program written by AI, when was it written by a student? At this point, for many of the things that I would assign in an introductory programming class, I would know the difference because the AI would have done a better job. It's quite good at writing simple programs. And the detectors that people have developed in order to detect, you know, was this written by a human or, you know, ChatGPT, those are also flawed. It's the same sort of flawed technology. And there are all kinds of bias that come into that. One of the recent studies was that non-native English speakers were far more likely to have been accused of cheating in writing an essay, and they would have been less likely to be accused if they actually used ChatGPT to generate the text. So this is sort of an arms race that will continue, right? There will be the generators and the generator detectors, and that will probably continue into the future and be imperfect and just a little bit of a guide.
Well, I asked because I had an off-the-record deep background talk with a creative person who works at a little arts group, I believe you helped start, called Meow Wolf, and I asked if, were they using AI, and he said, we're not, there's no formal policy on it, but we're not using it, but the question is, should there be this person said, the question is, should there be a formal policy, and should arts organizations, should museums, should MoMA, should they sort of say, as many created social media policies, this is our policy, this is how it's used, this is when it's being used. Anyone?
I would leave that to the artists to decide.
Yeah, I don't know. Each application is different. What would be the rules for using AI in a Meow Wolf? I mean, it can be a tool, obviously, to shortcut things, but it should never replace the main thing. I mean, of course, I've used tools as a writer. When I was a little kid, I wrote my stories, in crayon in big little books and stuff like that. And then I found an old manual typewriter in my uncle's attic. I used that for a while. And then I got a Smith Corona electric portable, etc. Used that. I never went to the selectric step. I skipped that step, technological. But I got an early computer, a CPM, so I was an early adapter there in the early 80s. And each of these tools was terrific, and made the act of creating easier for me. But at a certain point, I stopped. I still write my stories. I do. I'm on the internet, I get email, I do all that on my modern computer, Windows machine kind of thing, but I write my stories on a DOS machine with WordStar 4.0. Mainly because I didn't want the AI. I tried using Microsoft Word, and it has, I guess, what I would call AI features. I type a lowercase letter, it changes it to a capital. I didn't want it a capital. If I wanted a capital, I would have typed a capital. I read about, alien imaginary races and things, and it flags them all as spelling errors. They're not spelling errors. They're the people of Alpha Centauri. That's how their name is spelled. And so, the hell with this. I just want the thing that helps me, not the thing that is arguing with me, and I have to keep interrupting myself and go back. So these AIs better not get too pushy, I tell you, because I'm not going to stand for it. There's another issue here that it kind of relates, but it's we got a David and Goliath here, and we're a lot of the Davids who are getting together. But AI is being pushed and is being used by huge corporations, like Disney and Warner Brothers and all of that. They're looking into it, and publishers are looking into it, and all of that. And it's individual human beings who are fighting them. And the copyright law is very valuable and part of history, but effectively, if you study the history of creative arts, most of the really valuable copyrights are not owned by individuals who created them. They're owned by the corporations that were sold to, and sometimes in very unfavorable terms. Siegel and Schuster, who invented Superman, both died in poverty. They sold Superman for $500, and it became a billion-dollar property. And at the end, Schuster, who was the artist, was going blind, and he was delivering packages to DC, where looking for Federal Express, getting nothing from his creation. Stan Lee did okay. He was a smart guy, and he got himself a good contract with Marvel. Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko didn't. The guys who co-created Spider-Man, it was all work made for hire, it was all that stuff. So that's the danger. It's bad enough that you've got a corporation, which is not a person. I know the law says it's a person, That's, I think, a bad law. But,
I think it's a court ruling,
right,
a misinterpretation of the law, but we're stuck with it for now.
right. So, and the corporation, of course, has millions of dollars, and they can get really good lawyers to enforce these contracts. And so you create something, and you hope you have a good agent or a good lawyer when you sign it, because otherwise the corporation's going to own it forever. And if you die, that's inconvenient for them. But if AI can continue to write them, I mean, everybody who created the Marvel universe that we do, all the people, the actual people who created it are dead now. And Stan Lee was one of the last. He died at like 98 years old a few years ago. Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko preceded him, all the other artists and all that from that first generation of the 60s. They're all gone, but the corporation goes on, and right now they're using writers and artists that they hire and filmmakers to make these new films. But I'm sure they would gladly replace them with AI if AI could do as good a job.
But don't you think audiences would, I mean, even just that poster that was recently created for some movie that I'm not going to see, people immediately knew that it was AI generated and called it out.
Yeah, for the present, but how long will that be true? I wrote, when I was in college and high school, I played a lot of chess. And I ran chess tournaments for a few years to supplement my writing when I was just out of college. And I hadn't sold many stories yet. I'd sold one or two, but the best market in the field was Analog science fiction magazine. They paid the highest rates. And eventually I sold Analog a lot of stories. But the first thing I sold Analog, it was Analog Science Fiction Fact, was an article about computer chess. A factual article. I actually did it for a journalism class, and then I turned around and sold it. And the title of that was "The Computer Was a Fish," because at Northwestern, where I went, they had the world champion chess computer. It had beat all the other chess computers. There were only like 10 of them. And Northwestern had one, and I knew the guys who had made it and programmed it. The thing was, it was the best chess playing computer in the world, chess playing program, but it was a fish, which is a derogatory term that chess players use for a bad player. It wasn't very good. Virtually anybody in our chess club could beat the champion computer. And that article came out in 1971. Today, there's no human being on the face of the earth who can beat the top chess playing computers. The world champion can't beat them. The computer was a fish, but is no longer a fish. Now it's an unstoppable chess playing machine. I foresee that AI may go in the same route. Now you can tell the AI art, you can tell the AI books. Where will that be in 20 years?
Senator Heinrich, I mean, the Create AI Act, you have made this one of the issues is leveling a playing field. Can you talk a little bit, can we transition to the positive aspects, what you imagine, how it would be a tool?
When you think about the ability to create and test novel new molecules that can be used as therapeutics for disease, for example. These are some of the places where we can really speed up things that will benefit humanity. And one of the fundamental problems that we experience as a nation right now, and part of the reason why we have these divisions, is because many of the benefits are not spread equally around the country, right? So right now, AI is a very geographically centralized field where you have a few places like Seattle and the Bay Area are like the centers of development and new technology. It's the barriers to entry for the scale of some of these models are very high. And so what we did with the Create AI bill was to say, if we're going to use these tools, they should be accessible to students anywhere in the United States. So how do you do that? And it's kind of like what we do with national telescopes, where you have to, if you want to use the VLA, you write a grant, and then you get a certain amount of time on that tool. And the Create AI Act was designed to take that sort of an approach to a public tool that can be used for research and for people's advanced degrees.
Senator, though, you spoke about how we have a window that is, I guess, shut when it comes to social media. Isn't it also sort of the case that there's been so many bad actors in that space that even had we had the window, would people have even been able to foresee what the actual problems were? That the things we're imagining, the worst case scenarios with AI, there's some other worst case scenario that somebody is thinking of right now that we're not thinking of.
But if you don't do the initial tools, kind of build the muscle that later you will use for things that you didn't imagine it, then you won't have the ability to cross and adjust down the road. So it's always better to have some fundamentals in place to work from than to simply do what we did with Section 230, which really let social media run amok.
Well, and Dr. Moses, I mean, you have colleagues who have been working on issues related to misinformation, and some of the issues that seem like they just popped up out of nowhere, they were around, they were working on them. So you tell us, what should we actually be worrying about?
Well, there's a long list of things to worry about, certainly. I think that several of the issues have already been raised. I think this issue of concentrated corporate power is tremendously important. This is powerful technology, and having a few large companies that have the ability to build these neural networks and train them with, enormous amounts of computation that requires enormous amounts of power and water to make these work. That kind of technology at the moment is only in a few small hands, or a few large hands maybe. I think that we want to figure out ways to democratize the use of this technology, and that's an important step. I think that we are not in a position to forecast what all of the dangers are. This is not something where we're, even the best legislation and regulation that we absolutely need is a starting point, and that lets us stay in the game. It doesn't mean that we solve the problem, right? We're not going to solve the AI problem. We're going to hope to continue to make things better. This is like, fighting disease, right? You're not going to eliminate disease immediately, right? You just keep making better medicines, understanding what the next evolving threat is. Certainly, misinformation is something that is particularly difficult to deal with. And I think in the electoral space, but just in general, scams and things like that are really huge dangers. I think that, and maybe the secondary impact of that, which is that people won't know what to trust, right? True information won't be believed. And I think that is something that is really, really dangerous, and I don't know how we regulate ourselves out of that. I think there's a huge amount of education of the public. And
Well, we're already there. I mean, we're already there. How many Americans, is it tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, believe that Hillary Clinton operated a pedophile ring out of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C.? I don't know. Anyone who believes that, should they have the right to vote? I mean, come on. It's appalling what social media has shown us about the stuff that people will believe. And inventing new medicines, that's great if people actually take the medicines, but how many people are not, I missed when that emergency broadcast went out. Obviously I didn't get the broadcast that was going to turn me into a zombie. It failed, but millions of people are still waiting to be turned into zombies by our implants and our vaccines. How do you regulate this stuff? I believe in free speech so deeply. It's probably one of my main things, but people are just making this stuff up, and it's crazy. And I think that's one thing we never anticipated, that people would just lose their minds about this stuff.
Well, it returns to the garbage in, garbage out notion, which is, Senator Heinrich, I mean, given that so much of AI is using the internet as it exists now, how is that addressed within the regulatory framework?
I think, one, you need to be able to test these models when they have deep impacts on people's lives. And you need to know what data they were trained on. And, to some of these companies' credits, I've had conversations with many of these companies that are setting up whole ethics divisions to think through, how do we test models on the internet and test data that we want to be baked into these models, and what do we want to avoid? And those are incredibly important conversations to have before you turn a model loose on the internet. And we need protections like there should, if you have a website that has a do not crawl, policy that can be seen by these models, that should be the law. You shouldn't be able to test on those websites without consent of the publishers.
So should ChatGPT be allowed to exist as it is right now, or should it not have been able to?
I think that, for example, if you shouldn't, in my view, be able to train a model on copyrighted material or protected intellectual property without the consent of whoever owns that intellectual property. And that is at the heart of the case. And I think we should make that eminently clear.
So, sorry, were you about to say?
Well, I'm
please?
just going to add that, there are companies that call them things like OpenAI, right? That's it. But the data they train their models on is not open. And that's not actually something that's probably even, there's concerns maybe that you release these models and people can modify them. The data that train these models is just, another source of sort of the corporate power. There's no reason not to reveal what is trained upon, so people can look and see, was my data used to train these models? And if so, I should have the right to remove it. So it's really encouraging that companies are willing to have those conversations. And I think, the cat's out of the bag, but hopefully not long enough that we can't just change the rules at this
But
point.
we shouldn't just trust them that they will do the
Absolutely.
right thing, clearly. That's the point of policy.
Please.
Yeah, I don't know, I don't have the technological expertise to know how you check this, but it has to be checked in some ways, or writing and filmmaking and television are going to go the way of music. The whole music industry in this country was enormously impacted by all the free music on the internet. And it used to be that people toured in order to support the sales of their albums. That's where musicians made their money. Now nobody makes money on albums anymore. They issue albums to support their tours, which is where the money comes in, and that's because you can hear any song you want. You don't have to buy a record. You just go up on YouTube or one of those things and enter it, and there's the video, there's the song. And how do we get back? We're not going back. We can't reverse that thing and go back to the music system we had once upon a time. But I don't want to get there with writing and filmmaking. That would be a disaster.
Well, Senator Heinrich spoke of some ways in which AI could be useful to society, curing diseases, Dr. Moses, writing programs, but Ms. Martin, do you see any way in which AI would be helpful in the creative realm? So that's the gist of this panel.
Well, again, what's the definition of AI? Computers are definitely helpful in the creative realm. I've been using computers since 1982. I'm writing a book and I got a character and I say, oh, what the hell color is his eyes? In the old days, I would have had to go through 4,000 pages of material to see, did I mention Fred? Did I ever see what his eyes were like? Now I do a search and find, there it is. His eyes are blue. Doesn't prevent me from making mistakes. So computers do help us in that sort of way, but I'm still the one who decides what color his eyes are, not the computer. And it has to be a tool.
Dr. Moses, I think is the working definition of AI is any computer system that is emulating human thought, basically.
We don't have a great definition for AI. I think AI, you sort of think you know it when you see it. But I do.
So is my microphone AI? It said goodbye to me.
It said goodbye to you, maybe. If you continue to have a conversation with it, maybe it is. But I think that you pointed to a really key thing, that we want humans to be in charge of this technology. And I think that there was a story that I heard from a civil rights attorney that I think is really relevant for thinking about how the creative economy can influence the future of AI. And this was from John Powell, who said that during the Kennedy administration, and during the moonshot, the race to the moon, that the real power of Kennedy's speech and Kennedy's ability to rally the nation was not just because we were in a race with the Soviets, but because he could convince, and he did convince, all of America that we were all in this together, that all of us were needed, and we were all going to contribute to this future effort of getting to the moon. He actually told a story of going to, I think it was Johnson Space Center, and introducing himself to a janitor and saying he was there to talk, to talk about this moonshot and the effort to get to the moon. And the janitor replied to him, "Hi, my name is Bob. I'm a janitor here. I keep the floors clean, and I'm part of America's effort to get to the moon." And that is something we really, I think, need here. And we are all part of this, right? It's our data, right, that are training these models. We really need to find ways to get, the voices of all of humanity to try to shape what this technology looks like, how we use it, how we don't use it. And I think, people, artists and writers are really critical to that effort. So we need to engage, the imagination of all of us to say, what is this technology going to be used for, and what are we just simply going to not use it to do?
Senator Heinrich, before we open up to other questions, can you end by telling folks a little bit about what they will be seeing from the bipartisan caucus and going forward?
So much of what there are four of us who sort of took it upon ourselves, two Republican senators, myself and Senator Schumer, to try to make the ground more fertile for doing legislation. And so much of what we've been focused on have been upping the game of the entire Congress, or at least the Senate, in terms of understanding how these things work, making sure that people have the information to be able to be good legislators in this space. And it's been a wonderful opportunity to bring in all kinds of experts, from artists to people who create the models themselves, you name it, to come in and have their moment to answer questions for members of the Senate. That's been incredibly valuable. But the point of all that is to then go back in regular order to each of the normal pathways, so that if you're dealing with intellectual property issues, you're going to go through the same committee you've always gone through, and to make it more fertile ground for us to actually be able to produce legislation, and sooner rather than later.
Well, thanks to all three of you. It's so nice to talk to people who are not running for city council. We're going to now open up to, I think we have a full row of journalists. I think we're just going to go across, and Senator Heinrich's office asked that people just keep it to one question and let everyone know who you are and what outlet you're from. Would you like to start on the end?
Yeah,
Great.
for sure.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Jacob. I'm from Albuquerque Business First. So looking at this issue from like a business perspective, I guess one of the main questions I have when it comes to like regulating this through legislation is how do you kind of walk the line or find the balance between carefully legislating, regulating AI, but then also letting companies, businesses, whoever might want to use AI, use it in the most efficient, best way possible to get the most, profit, or however you want to judge that. How do you find that balance?
I think you want to incentivize innovation, which goes back to, like, for example, the Create AI bill that we've put together. But the application, when there is a substantial amount of risk involved, that's when you want a regulatory framework to apply. And so I think that's the lens that you need to, that policymakers should view this through, is how do you make sure that right now we have a structural advantage where as a nation, because of our educational system, because of the talent that we have, because of where some of these, where technology has flourished in the past, and we should use that to maintain that lead. At the same time, there are huge risks that involve individuals' lives. And so when that threshold gets crossed, that's when you want to make sure you have a regulatory framework in place to be able to address these things. So if you're going to have AI driving a car, then you need to have a threshold that says, here's what we expect in terms of safety before you can do this.
Cool, and if we could keep the questions to being about the creative economy and AI, and definitely not about what Mr. Martin is writing right now. Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Megan Terros. I'm with Source New Mexico, and I kind of wanted to go back to sort of the idea of disinformation, creating false images, creating, mock versions of someone else's book, claiming it's their book. Is there concern amongst any of you that because we were kind of late to the game in regulating social media, that may pose a problem that's more difficult to regulate? Because I imagine perhaps if we get ahead on copyright, for instance, perhaps we can't comb, your books, Mr. Martin, but somebody can feed information into an AI that's getting better and say, make a photo of what's happening, say, between Israel and Gaza right now, in the style of a journalistic photo, or a photographer's artistic view of what's happening, and then they can just plop it on Twitter or Facebook. Is there a concern that those two things will inevitably create a problem that's maybe more difficult to solve than some of these issues that we haven't reached yet?
Well, yes, and it is an issue. It's actually been an issue for a while with all the photo maneuvering things. You can, and people on the internet have been using it for a decade or more. They create revenge porn by taking their girlfriend's head and putting it on the body of someone else, and depending on whether it's how well done, some of it can fool people and some of it can't fool people, and you can do that with journalistic things too. You can, our photographs, since photography really matured, have had a tremendous impact on our culture and history. The photo of the guys putting the flag up at Iwo Jima, inspired a nation, even though it was kind of the second time they did it and a little bit fake. But during the Vietnam War, that video of the Republic of Vietnam shooting the prisoner in the head, God, incredible impact it had. You could make that photo tomorrow with, using Hamas or Israel or Ukraine, or you could do something like that. You could, you can do anything with these things. And if they get out there and people start accepting them as real, we gotta have some detecting system that says, no, fake. Otherwise we're lost. I don't know how you determine. I can't determine just from looking at it whether it's a real photo or a fake photo. Maybe people more expert. I know we have a lot of photographers here who have actual cameras as opposed to their cell phones, but it is a huge concern.
I think you'll see this really crystallized in the 2024 election. And I do think some of this is going to be solved by technology. Some of it's going to have to be solved by cultural literacy among all of us, and a willingness to question things we see and hear and their provenance. And that's a tougher issue to solve than the technology piece.
Yeah, and just a quick addition to that is that very issue, there's already fake images from Israel and Gaza that are flooding certain social media, corners of social media. I think that the real danger with combining AI and social media is this ability to accelerate, right? AI can just be deployed at such scale. And with social media, it took a while to build up, billions of us on social media. Now we're already there. And so the audience of people that can be brought into this AI misinformation space, there's no buildup required, right? I think the speed with which these things will really permeate the culture is quite frightening.
And the companies have no ability or will to monitor it either, right? Isn't that, that exact scenario is happening on Twitter or whatever it's called right now. So, okay. Sorry, I asked a lot of questions. Go on.
That's okay. Marianne Todd, Santa Fe, New Mexican. Just how detailed could we possibly even get with regulation in terms of not being able to tell, what's fake or not? But we talk about corporations. Can we mandate that corporations label their AI as AI generated? Is that a possibility?
Sure, absolutely.
Well, we can mandate it, but the internet is global, so how can we tell, are the Russians going to obey our laws? And and, do listen to us, or are they just gonna be flooding in? You go up on Google, you don't know if you're getting a website from Russia or Gaza or anywhere.
Can that be controlled by the social media outlets? Can that be controlled by,
I mean, I think you can create structures to be able to take down, non-compliant platforms. We're not going to be able to regulate the world, but we can set the standard here, and then when we do that, typically much of the world follows. But we're always going to have that challenge. I mean, I sit on the intelligence committee, and one of the exercises I went through after 2016 was I asked to see all the ads that were run in New Mexico that were paid for by a credit card from another country, particularly rubles. And there were a lot of interesting ads run in New Mexico. So you make progress on these things. You don't always have the whole solution.
I don't know if this really addresses your question, but it's some of this is so dispiriting to me and so depressing to me because, as a science fiction guy, growing up as a kid, I looked forward to the wonderful future that awaited all of us, when we would go to the moon and we'd have colonies on Mars and things like that, and medicine would be better, and transportation would be better. We'd have our jetpacks and our flying cars, and it would all be good. But also, if we had global communication, it would create understanding. We're all just people. We would be talking to people in other countries, and they would be talking to us, and anybody could talk to anybody. And God, it doesn't seem to have worked out that way, does it? It just seems that we hate each other more than we ever did. There were great dreams, I think, at one point for the human race coming together, creating a Star Trek world where we're all Terrans, we're all Earth people, Earthlings, and instead we see countries breaking apart and endless enmity over quarrels that began 1,000 years ago. And come on, we're all in this together. But how do we get that anymore? I don't know. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have vented, but it's
Matt,
a
do you have an
depressing thing
answer?
to realize when you look around what's happening in the world right now. And I don't think the internet is helping.
So I'm not going to be able to get us to that world, but I do want to say that, for the technical piece of this, which I think is a very small piece of this, I think most of our problems are not technical, they're social and cultural and political and need regulation and change in practices, the way we do things. There are some small, to give you a teeny bit of hope, things like, for example, today, I think the last few days, Adobe announced, okay, they can produce AI-generated images, but they will have a seal, a cryptographic seal that will guarantee that these images were generated from their non-copyrighted material. So, if we have rules that say that in order to post on this social media site, you need an affirmative guarantee about certain things before it can be posted, that could potentially be a path forward, right, to remove some of the misinformation. That is going to require, companies cooperating, and I don't know what the regulatory sphere would look like there. But there are ways that big shifts in the way we think about what can be communicated that maybe have some technical foundations that could assist us with those sorts of things. And maybe once we see we can make some progress and things like that, maybe we can start to tackle some of the bigger questions that face us as humans. It's hard to see a brighter future there, but I think we're taking small steps is certainly important.
And we only have about 2 minutes left, so we'll have time for a quick question.
Okay.
Kevin, take you.
Sure. Mike. Okay. I have a big voice. All right. One of the things we talked about is in regarding particularly things like the upcoming election. Well, Kevin Mercer at KSFR.
Kevin, is this about
Yes.
creative economy? Okay.
Yes, because part of that deals with an example. I think and we talked. I'm trying to get to it. Like for instance, we get things stuff like people building a attack ad that actually uses you, and it sounds like it's you, and you're saying something you never said before. Our rate as a journalist is the exact same problem could be coming up. We could have people who are producing things that look like maybe a story I wrote, and it sounds like me when they hit the little link of the MP3, but it's not me, and they're saying something that's total utter nonsense, or makes it sound like you're biased to one way or the other. I think that's one of the things that us as journalists are a big concern that we're also having as this continues to grow. Because there are people out there now who, I know someone who actually lost his voice, and they use artificial intelligence to use his voice so he actually can broadcast stories.
Yeah, and it goes back to you should be in control of your likeness and your voice.
Yeah.
And in the political context,
That's really
deep fakes are something that we should and can regulate. And it's one of the areas that I'm hopeful we may actually see something come out of the Senate before fairly early in this process. And you know, you have to have, because of our history, you have to have exceptions for things like satire because of the First Amendment. But you can't say, like, you can prohibit the kind of activities that we've already seen in the Republican presidential primary campaign.
Thank you, everybody here. We'd like to invite the audience to kindly exit. We will pause for a moment to take a brief photograph of our panel here, but at this time, we'd like everyone to exit the theater. Thank you.